for being a part of the show today. We are going to have a great show for you today. And guess what? 34, it seems like felony counts. 34 felony counts on the former president of the United States, with many more felony counts to come, including what I think he should also be tried for is treason. But hey, who am I? Anyway, let me tell you what I'm resolved to do going forward. I am not going to let Donald Trump dominate what we need to speak about. I am not going to allow Donald Trump to be the one that dictates the messaging. Americans are hurting. 80% of Americans are a paycheck away from being in dire straits financially. And just letting Donald Trump take up all the air is a blessing to the corporatocracy that spends its time simply hyperventilating about Donald Trump. Poor people living in trailers, even if they may think they support Donald Trump, concentrating on what's occurring on Donald Trump isn't going to feed their bellies, but it may let them forget about the pain. We're not going to let them keep on the transient over and over and over again. So we're going to talk real issues here. Anyway, welcome aboard, Michael Rodnan. Welcome aboard, Paul Fleming. Welcome aboard, Eric Hayes. Welcome aboard, para ver quién más está aquí. Welcome aboard as well, May Wood. Welcome aboard, Paul Fleming Sr. Welcome aboard, Melanie Keelan de Barcelona, Spain. Welcome aboard, ABQ, Rodnan, etc. Anyhow, first article from Common Dreams, U.S. voters, and I think he has some stuff he wants me to put on the screen. I guess I will oblige with the screen. Here we go. Americans believe that transgender people should be allowed to change their bodies however they want. All likely voters, 69%, 22% transgender adults should be allowed to change their bodies, while para ver, the other 22% says no, but Democrats, 81%, independents, 72%, 54% for Republicans. So even Republicans are believe have some sort of personal freedom. Only a third of Americans know a trans or non-binary person. All likely, 33%, but Democrats, 36%. Independent and third party knows more. That's 39%. And Republicans, of course, trigloditas, they know the fewest of them all. And the next thing he wanted on the screen, let's see if I can get it there. I got it there. Americans believe that transness is natural and normal, not a woke invention. All people, 57%. Democrats, 78%. Independents, 58%. And of course, Republicans, 34%. And the last one, but not the least I would garner, says, even Republicans think the amount of anti-LGBTQ legislation is excessive political theater. 64% in total, 72% Democrats, 65% independents, and 55% Republicans. So all those bills they're passing with the expectation that it's going to bring people closer to them likely will fail. Because again, people are looking at it as just what it is, political theater. Just like the woke moniker is nothing but political theater. And that's why I say when people say, oh, that's just woke, I say, yes, woke. I am woke. I accept being woke. I want to be woke. I hope you are woke. If you know what's good for you, you would be woke. Because being woke means you're smart. Being woke means you're intelligent. Being woke means you're aware. Being woke means that you are someone who believes in moving forward. All right. Maywood says, good afternoon to the posse. Breach MCP says, Michael, falsifying bills since what occurred is a first degree. 34 charges. Each check is a charge. It's interesting as well, right? Because a lot of people like to say, they're going to do something novel by connecting a state crime and using a federal crime to allow that state crime to be instantiated as a felony as opposed to a misdemeanor. Turns out they didn't have to do that. What happened to all our genius attorneys who should have figured that out, that there was so much that he did statewide that would allow them to not force or have to use a federal crime to increase that charge as a felony. The man needs to be charged. The man is a crook left and right. He's crooked people. He's done all those things left and right. It's coming home to roost. And you could see it in his eyes. He's probably going to go to Florida and after he recovers from the shock of being just a petty thug, he's going to go to Mar-a-Lago and somehow try to put on that macho face, and I'm going to raise money on it, and slowly people are going to peel off because they know that they're dealing with just a crook in chief. Just a crook in chief, right? Just a crook in chief. All right, it looks like I hadn't placed that thing on the screen, so let me go ahead and I'll be rotating Rudnin's polls in a minute, like I'm doing right now. All right, Michael also says, Eric says, here is your commissioning buddies using tax money to pay personal legal expenses should they occur. Hidalgo and her COVID-11 million contract is issued. She hit, come on, Eric, you have to write that I can read the darn thing. Rodney Ellis storing personal art. I know, I guess he saving the art must not have been a crime, huh? All right. We also have, Eric, it seems like leaking it out, too, would be a felony. Would anyone pay for that? I don't know. Michael Rudnin says, Mother Jones, New York prosecutor on Tuesday released the formal indictment against Donald Trump, detailing 34 felonies counts. Hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. Pundits have been speculating for weeks about the exact nature of the allegations against former president, but this is the first time the details have been available. Trump arrived at the courthouse at about 1:30. He's promptly arrested. But he's even charged or mentioned in the affidavit as well, in the indictment as well, was that he paid off a doorman $30,000. I think something to do with a third party. What can I say? Dire straits thanks to our current economic policy of the current administration. Keep dreaming, Eric. Keep dreaming. Michael Rudnin says, Egberto, yep, I'd rather talk about the Republicans losing the culture war. They are losing the culture war. And you know why they're losing the culture war? Because people are getting smarter, younger, and all that, those people that were reared with all those bad stuff and refuse to change, they will continue to migrate to the minority. Egberto, the images aren't on the screen, and that's why I put it there now. I'm continue to scroll through them. That's the other one. Only a third of Americans know a trans or non-binary person. Lee Grant is in the house. He says, hi, all. Hi, Lee. Breach MCP says, again, DA gave to the media a pass. But anyway, let me go ahead now and play what we have for today, which is Andrew Schmookler had a visitor over, and I want you to hear from the visitor that he had in this interview, and then we'll continue with the show after his dinner with his neighbor. Anyhow, let's get busy and let you hear that one now. Welcome to another edition of Politics Done Right. With us today, Dr. Andy Schmookler, PhD, prize-winning author, former Democratic candidate for Congress in Virginia's very red Shenandoah Valley, former talk show radio host, summa cum laude graduate of Harvard University. And you hear me talk about Andy on and on again, so I won't say any more. But anyhow, Andy, welcome again to Politics Done Right. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm fine. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Well, actually, we have a continuing conversation. You are going to be having a wonderful dinner date with a couple of nice Republicans who somehow you wonder how they could have adapted maybe some nature of what has become a fascist being in our country. Anyway, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. And the thing, I wrote a piece, I published it as one of my weekly op-eds sometime last year, about the teeter-totter as a metaphor for how American politics destiny gets decided. And what I think has happened over the last generation is that a lot of people that we would have said were good people, good Americans, good your neighbors or whatever, got pulled over in the teeter-totter on which if good outweighs evil, then good things happen. If the weight goes to the other side, then a lot of destructive things happen. And what has happened in America over the last generation or 30 years is that the teeter-totter has tilted such that there have been some good people who, if you looked at the people in like early 70s, they're younger than me a little bit, but so they probably first became aware of there being a president of the United States when Eisenhower was president. That they grew up and they were probably, if history were to look at their political participation all the way up until Clinton becoming president, let's say, you would have said that they were quite defensible, that maybe even they were constructive in their total political. I mean, they've joined volunteer organizations. They help with child care. They try to establish a YMCA in the community. They are people who are public spirited in their lives. And I bet that they had a very defensible political record back. But now, over the last 30 years, the Republican Party changed from something which was quite defensible by the standards of political parties that are always deeply flawed. It's just the nature of human institutions. They went from being something which you could respect the Republican Party from Lincoln through the first Bush, with major caveats, but still a decent party for a democracy to have. Not necessarily inferior to the Tories or to the Christian Democrats in Germany, or the LDP in Japan, or the conservatives in Australia. Yeah, it's similar. But that party got transformed. So there's a takeover that took place in the party. And the party went from something which sort of, on balance, might have been toward the good, to something that was consistently toward the evil. And that happened, in some way or other, the party was able to change in that fundamental way and use propaganda to bring those good people from the Eisenhower Republican electorate over to the force of something which is in fundamental ways the opposite of what they had used to love. If you'd asked them to articulate, why are you conservatives? They would have been able to give a speech that had some plausibility about some real values that they actually lived by. And they saw the Republican Party as representing those values, and they weren't completely wrong. But now? So the question that you asked me before about holding them accountable, and I responded, well, the thing that we need to ask is, how do we get people who slid somehow, who were induced to move over the fulcrum in the battle between good and evil in America, somehow became slowed down and evil started outweighing the good. So we really do see the force of destruction in America much stronger in relationship to the constructive forces than it ever has been in my lifetime. Well, how do we get them to come back to the right side of the fulcrum so their goodness informs their politics instead of whatever this is that the poisoning of their minds has created in them?
You know, you keep talking about their goodness, right? And I know the goodness, I think, is relative. And also, I think goodness depends on what part's goodness. I think we're all part good. We all have part skeletons, if you will. All humans, none of us are devoid of those types of opposites, if you will. But I think one of the fundamental issues with, let's say, the masses of the Trump voter that we don't address is why earlier you spoke about Fox News and others poisoning these Republicans, these friends of yours inclusive. And I think they could only have been poisoned with having particular receptors.
Quite true. Let me say one that I've particularly, if you look at liberals, you can find, I think, political flaws in almost any liberal you might talk with. Liberals lean sometimes too far in certain directions.
Sure.
But the virtues of the conservative, this is, I think, true cross-culturally. And they're very good at getting in line behind
a leader,
an authority. They're good at patriotism. They're good at law and order. They're good. If you were a wartime leader and you wanted to rally the people to do what was necessary, like FDR did, you would probably find the conservative side of the society a great ally of your accomplishing what you needed to accomplish. But the same thing that makes them so good at getting in line, whereas Democrats and Unitarians and liberals, variously referred to as like herding cats, The problem is there's a vulnerability that same orientation toward authority. I think of the radio show I did on God said it, I believe it, and that settles it. And authority. The same thing that makes them move as a unit makes them vulnerable to being misled, so that they move as a unit, seek Heil, screaming in the square at Nuremberg. That is their vulnerability, is that they will fall in line behind an evil leader.
And what you said is how the question should be how we bring them back into the fold. How do we get them from where they are? And my thing, and I think that's very important. And I think to do that, don't you have to get to the earlier, before I think you interrupted me, I said, what are the receptors that they have that brought them there? And I think there's a humongous receptor, and that is the lie that somehow the loss that in empowering others mean the loss of power for a particular group. I think that's the biggest receptor out there. And
there's something more fundamental. I mean, you're right, but that's a function of something else. I mean, people have asked the question, why is it that some people seem to have a need to have hostility between themselves and other groups?
Right.
Like how does some of these right-wing Jews in Israel have the attitude that they have toward the Palestinians, and it's getting uglier and uglier because of that. And what is it? Why? I mean, my feeling when I meet somebody from another group, like a different nationality, or a recent immigrant from Latin America, or black people, my wife and I both just get great pleasure from having goodwill exchanged across that boundary. I just love when we are able to do that, which is why we're having these people over for dinner. But but there are people, and here are the receptors. There are people who have a need for, say, in America, for blacks to be something different from what they are, something less than human, something worthy of hating. That receptor has been there throughout the history, certainly, from before. It's been there forever in America. And why is it that some people are moved to reach out with the hand of goodwill across those boundaries, and some people want to make war across those boundaries? And then you get into child rearing and all kinds of personality dynamics. It's been written about the authoritarian personality, big important psychological study done after World War II, when they weren't asking about white and black. They were asking about how did the Holocaust happen. But yeah, there are people who have these receptors, and it's a function of the whole structure of the culture. Which, I mean, I have a son who went to elementary school here. And there was a rule. He was drinking water from a drinking fountain. And a teacher said, "You've been there for more than 5 seconds. It's time to leave." That's the rule. 5 seconds you get at the drinking fountain. Who the hell needs to legislate that? And when I talked about that on the radio, I got callers that heard what I was saying about we can let our kids work things out more for themselves without having authorities governing exactly what they do. I got calls from people out there who heard me as saying, "You're calling for anarchy." So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff. It's real deep in the culture. A lot of stuff having to do with power, a lot of stuff having to do with order and the need for war to be waged to have good order get achieved.
But Andy, I want to circle back at the receptors again, because I want to get that. I want to get that covered, and because I think you already pointed out that. Yeah, there are people who have these receptors. Black, white is one of those receptors. Jewish, not Jew is another one of these receptors. But for those receptors to be activated, I think it had to make those others some sort of a villain that's going to hurt you. It's sort of like the survivability thing intrinsic survivability, if you will.
Well, healing our culture about the feelings about race is, history suggests that it's going to be an ongoing struggle.
But remember, let's still remember, there never used to be a thing called race, you know?
But in any event, the relationship between who are the people called whites and the people called blacks. I don't want to get into the anthropology or the genetics of this thing. But the fact is that something that people think of in terms of race has been an enormous part of American culture, and it's been problematic in all kinds of social pathology.
And again now, so the receptors, if you're talking about bringing these people back into the fold, how do you if it's been with us forever and the receptors have been activated, how the hell do we get those receptors deactivated so that we can come back into the fold?
Well, it's going to be a long and complex problem. But let me first of all, I don't think the people who are coming over are probably carriers of that disease, that particular disease. I don't have that sense. So they might, one couple might be. The other guy with that distinguished naval career, I just don't think that that's what I pick up from him. He said something about how he abhorred slavery. We were discussing him and me as Thomas Jefferson and John
But
Adams.
Abhorring slavery and thinking you're equal are two different things.
That's true. I mean, even Abraham Lincoln, I don't think.
He didn't think folks were equal, true.
Yeah. But he had love. And I think that matters most. It's basically goodwill and kindness versus cruelty and injury. Anyway, I'm thinking that it's the short-term thing is to understand that if we go back to the America of Jimmy Carter, and sort of were able to perceive the fires of racism burning in the minds and hearts of white Americans. And then compared that picture with the fires burning over the last, since Trump became president, at least, but growingly, from Newt Gingrich and Rush Limbaugh all the way on, you would see that the fires were the embers were being blown on. So the receptor was always there, but you had to add the exploitation of that vulnerability by the fascistic force. And so part of the thing is to weaken the fascistic force. And what's going on right now with Fox and Dominion voting machines is part of the battle. It doesn't heal American racism, but we can take power away from Fox News. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but there are various intelligent people that I'm following who see scenarios in which Rupert Murdoch, Fox News, get taken out of the picture. And people can argue, I think plausibly, if there are no Fox News, there would have been no violent insurrection. I don't know if that's true, but it can be reasonably argued. I think that if Fox News gets taken off, there'll be a loss of power to keep feeding the poison into the minds of tens of millions of people, some of whom were willing to invade the Capitol and try to overturn election because of the lies that Fox knowingly told. And now that's been exposed, and that may be part of how we get the power of fascism to retreat. It's one battle. The battlefield is multi-level. We even have to care about how our children are get brought up. Because if we could raise more, I think the answer to the question, why do some people have goodwill across boundaries and other people make war on it? It's got to do with what is done to the child when it gets socialized. If the socialization feels like the force from the outside is making war on who the person is, there's got to be a boundary and there's got to be a conflict. And since interior conflict is very painful, it is a relief to say it's not a problem if I'm broken. There is those people out there, the Jews that we send to the camps, or the blacks that we oppress.
Yeah. Let me tell you this, okay? Because you just hit a very important number there when you talk about it's how the child is socialized. And you know who else notice all of that? The powers that be. When you see DeSantis and the crowd who are trying to talk about critical thinking and not allowing critical thinking and throwing away books and all that kind of stuff and diminishing learning, that is exactly where we're going. And I'm glad that you brought that particular portion up with regards to it's how you socialize kids going forward, because and
DeSantis focus on you make a really interesting point there, bringing in DeSantis as the political figure, and then there's the educational system, which has got to do with how we bring up our children.
Right.
And DeSantis, his every move sort of drips with fascistic impulse.
And here's the deal. We were talking about those receptors, and I asked you, how do we attenuate those receptors or get rid of them altogether? And that's what the critical thinking is. Because if one is critically thinking, they realize that we are all pretty much darn the same. You're critically thinking and you learn these things and you learn what has happened in the past to change all of this. And guess what? The receptors are nullified. But once those that are trying to follow the fascist, what's been the fascist path that you are speaking about now, if that is actually, if they are able to clamp down on that, we'll continue on this path. Otherwise, we mitigate it. Look, we're coming up on time here. I love the way you brought that around, because it exactly that stuff about socializing children, I think is a message that I don't know if we should use the term socializing children, but go ahead.
Let me throw in the critical thinking is important. Like media education. I've been involved with, so people are not so easy to manipulate.
Right.
But it's not so. There are deeper levels. I mean, the people we're having over for dinner are intelligent, college-educated people. So it's not. I expect that if we saw clearly, we would see that they had been socialized to be able to think critically in some respects, but not to be able to think critically in others. The people who all the Virginians who died in Pickett's charge were fighting for a system, the slave system, that was contrary to their interests. But they had been manipulated in a transparent way into not seeing what the Irish immigrants were seeing, which is why they settled in the North. No free white person would want to have to compete against slave-free labor that could be harnessed for simply the price of treating them as livestock.
Now, here's the thing.
They could not see that because they've been taught not to be able to think about what power had to say to them.
And that's where let's go back to your dinner guest.
Yes.
And this is what's going to be important. This is pretty important here. You talk about their intelligence and their being college educated. I always wondered how doctors, how surgeons could ever be racist. I always wondered that. How is it possible for a surgeon, a doctor who knows everything about one's body to be racist? But the socialism, hold on. The socialization that you spoke about earlier, starting from young, the critical thinking from young is what's necessitated to negate that. And before you come in, I'm going to make this story quick. It's my personal story. As a person from Central America who had very strong homophobic inklings, I was an educated person. I was a college-educated person, engineer, business owners, and all of that. And at that point, still homophobic because of my socialization. I was wrong. I was completely, as smart as I want to believe that I was simply not ill-informed, but there was something wrong with me. There was that receptor in me that was placed in me.
Your teacher taught you an attitude, didn't it?
Right. And
your culture taught you.
Right, culture. And as soon as I was able to extricate that mentally, it solved the problem mentally. But you know what still offended me? If I saw two guys kissing. You know what still offended me? If I saw things that were homophobic, even as I knew I was wrong. It didn't happen until I was socialized and had real gay friends and was able to change from the heart. That is when I changed. And that is what I think is lacking, in my opinion, with many of those who are intelligent, smart, and still have these different prejudices. They have to be confronted, as I was confronted with it, to be able to make my choice appropriately. Please close us out, my dear friend.
Okay. Well, one of their vulnerabilities is also around the idea of,
it's always about him.
And that settles it.
Always be about you.
God said it. One of the things which you're describing is that you are a person who was open to revising the original text. You were not, whereas one of the virtues of the conservatives is also a vulnerability. They are people who hand down intact some of the cultural treasures. They're traditionalists. They preserve sacred texts, and they preserve the bigotries and other flaws.
Above and beyond their intelligence.
Yeah, but every day, in fact, as I get older, in some ways I get more turned off by certain aspects of myself. There are attitudes that I've got that I don't know what to do with. I don't agree with these attitudes, but the feelings are somewhat visceral, or at a deeper level. And when you think about, it's not about race. So No, actually, when I think about physical contact between me and a black person, it's not exactly the same feeling as a feeling of, I don't believe in that shit, excuse me, but there it is. But nonetheless, for me, black people have always been something that I've had a positive, heartful feeling toward. Somehow I got it from my mom. And so when I watched football games as a kid, I would always root for the college that had black players and against like Ole Miss or Alabama or somebody like that wouldn't have blacks on them. It was important to me. But there's elements of things that have been passed down that
that you still have.
I still have it. I accept that.
Right. No. And what I'm saying is in my case, when I talk about homophobia, the very first thing was for me to first be honest with myself to understand that I had the problem before I could actually get the problem fixed.
I think the fact that you were able to move. I mean, I was just describing how there are certain attitudes that I wish I didn't have, but don't know what to do about. But the thing is, I was saying about the guy with the distinguished naval career. The military is a cult. It is not, ours is not to question why. Ours is but to do or die. Culture. And, there are circumstances that are very important where that character structure is a virtue. But it also goes along with a certain rigidity. The rigidity of the fundamentalist that if the Bible wasn't completely literally true, and if the world wasn't just less than 6,000 years old, his whole world would shatter. So, it's so complex. But the thing is, we as the United States have always had enough good things going for us that you could believe in the America that I grew up in, that the balance of forces was positive, that we could make progress, that we could become a better society, and we were becoming a better society in a great many ways. So I think that we've got the material to work on. We need to take the people who have had their weaknesses exploited, and by whatever means works, and I'm not pretending that I know what works, but I'm hoping that the dinner party that be here is one little thing that will create the atmosphere in which the movement back across the teeter-totter to the good side might be further.
Andy Schmookler, let me tell you first of all, if you're talking, you're not fighting. If you're talking, you're communicating. So I think that is important. Andy Schmookler, prize-winning author and former Democratic candidate for Congress in Virginia's very red Shenandoah district, cum laude, radio show host, all that good stuff. Thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right.
Thanks for having me again.
All right, folks, I hope you enjoyed that. That is my good buddy. We still have several more Andy Schmooklers to come because we're doing this series, How to A Better Human Story. And I love speaking to him. Daniel Edo says, I found Andy hilarious. He thinks he's so intellectual, always throwing all ill quips to show he is well-read. He is. But his whole argument is ethereal. Very funny because there is zero self-awareness. Actually, I think he's self-aware. In fact, he says self-aware to say things like, I don't like this about myself, which I say about myself as well, And good folks who ask themselves questions, I think they go through that as well. Anyhow. You guys had a lot of stuff here. Let's see. Paul Fleming says race has been demonized through the media and sadly through churches. The last president made it a proud thing to do by displaying hate through telling his followers who to hate. The why is clear. Population-wise, people of color will be the dominant demographic. Thus, we must not include in history and eliminate their ability to vote, thus silencing their voice. Let's see. Lee Grant has no idea about who's actually getting censored. Oh, Vox. YouGov poll, 45% of Republicans want the government to shutter biased or inaccurate media. Foreign Policy Magazine, U.S. conservatives are threatening global free speech. Republican attacks on domestic media are undermining legal protections around the world. We have to, before we make statements, it's a good thing to be aware of what's really the truth. Carl Cox says the neocon right, especially the MAGA crowd, wants to shut down free speech. It doesn't have the same fascist feelings they have. And going down to Michael Rudnan, he says, Lee Grant, whites will no longer be the majority in the U.S. within 2 decades, only a plurality. Losing the majority, are you afraid that white people will be treated the way systemic racism has previously treated marginalized minorities? It's an unfounded fear. We're not going backwards. Exactly. And that is the fear. And well, that is not the fear of from my vast family of white friends and family. That isn't the fear that comes naturally. That is the fear that is implanted. Because remember this, it's only a small group of people that were superbly evil to a different set of people that they wanted to enslave. Then they had to make those enslaved be somehow bad, somehow warranted being mistreated and being hated. So a narrative by the plutocracy was put out. You keep people separate. I don't remember the rebellion that occurred when I think it was black and white farmers rebelled against the master or something to that effect. I don't remember the story in detail. But they had to ensure that that would never happen again. Because if the masses get together, and it follows the same tenet that I talk about whenever we unite Appalachia, the ghettos and the barrios, the stereotype that I've always used, the plutocracy is in trouble. No longer can we have a system that takes away from the many to the few. No longer can we have a system that is not egalitarian, because we would demand that we not be this enslaved, and I'm talking about everybody now, enslaved by an economic system that doesn't value what we make, what we produce. All right? Let's see. Let's go ahead, and there's another video that I have scheduled for today. I want you guys to see. It had to do with what occurred on Sunday's morning show, and this is going to cover the Trump thing to some extent. It just kind of give you a bit of context. So let's go ahead and play that, and then we'll take it on the other side. We speak about very often how much of the public perception of our politics, much of the public perception of even this case, the case with Donald Trump, is dictated by what the media is putting out. I want to show you a pushback that I hope many caught, because it was an important pushback by Lanny Davis, Michael Cohen's attorney, against Dana Bash, who had a narrative that she was about to set that was necessarily corrected. Check this out.
Let me correct the record and come back to your questions. He just said that the federal prosecutors passed on the case. In fact, they could not prosecute Donald Trump because he was a sitting president. He knows better than to misstate the facts on that.
Well, let me just to be clear on that. Yes, they passed when Donald Trump was a sitting president, but he hasn't been a sitting president for more than 2 years, and they still decided not to prosecute.
Well, your they is after.
Republicans, for 14 years plus, they have been complaining about Obamacare. They've been wanting to repeal Obamacare. In fact, McCain, before he died, was the savior of Obamacare as we know it, and the savior of Republicans and Democrats alike. Had he not voted down that, we would have had the destruction of Obamacare with nothing to replace it with. Well, after the pandemic, or during the pandemic, the Biden administration passed laws that allowed temporarily for low-income people to get to get their Medicaid, so that they could get saved, if you will, health care. Well, it expires this weekend, and now there's a possibility that 15 million Americans are going to lose their coverage. Republicans, again, decade after decade, been talking about having a better healthcare system, a healthcare system that works, but have never been able to provide a system. Obamacare was the closest. Notice what I'm going to say here. Obamacare has been the closest to come to something Republicans should have accepted, because Obamacare is a Republican-based bill. Obamacare is a conservative healthcare bill, not based on the efficiency of the healthcare system, the efficiency of a single-payer system, the efficiency of getting private sector out of paying a healthcare bill, which they provide no innovation for doing so. Again, Obamacare is a conservative implementation of healthcare insurance. Nothing more, nothing less. And they went against it because it was placed into power by whom? Obama. Now they still want to repeal it. Well, you know who has a message for them? They're good older time conservative, Joe Scarborough. Listen to this and then we'll take it on the other side.
This weekend, state officials around the country can start removing people who no longer qualify for Medicaid. During the pandemic, states received additional federal funding in exchange for allowing low-income people to continue receiving health care coverage, even if they no longer are qualified for it. About 90 million people benefited from this. That's more than 1 in 4 Americans. Now that the provision has expired, the federal government estimates about 15 million people could lose coverage.
You know, Mike Barnacle, it is really remarkable. It's been remarkable if you look through the years at the number of uninsured Americans that don't have health insurance. It's remarkable the changes that have taken place since the Affordable Care Act in 2010. As a bill, this bill was, of course, roundly criticized by the right. Also, though, a lot of people on the left very suspicious of what's been known now as Obamacare. But you just look at the numbers of insured Americans and, more importantly, the declining number of uninsured Americans. By that very important measure, Obamacare has been a remarkable success.
What's remarkable also, Joe, is from the inception of this to its passage, which was, in the words of Joseph R. Biden back then, a big blank deal.
Big deal.
Okay.
That the other political party in this country, the Republican Party, has thus far fought it every inch of the way, still fighting it every inch of the way, without proposing an alternative to it. All these years have passed, and millions of Americans have now become insured health-wise. They have health insurance for the first time in their lives. But again, the dissembling of government, the lack of initiative on the part of the Congress, because it's so divided. We have a failure of the CHIPS Act, childhood health programs, things like that. So there are a lot of children who will now go without health insurance, and people on the verge of losing their health insurance in various states because they didn't sign on to the Medicare stuff. I mean, this country is backwards in terms of the way it insures people compared to several other civilized nations. We are not in the lead in this, and we fail too many people. Still, the Obamacare Act was a huge success.
And we've been making great progress because of that. It does bear repeating and underlining what Mike just said. Mm-hmm. For 14 years, Republicans have been opposing this and have been promising that they would provide an alternative for 14 years. And for 14 years, doing nothing but just reflexively opposing Obamacare, they have not provided an alternative. I mean, there are a lot of legitimate concerns about Obamacare that have come from the left, that have come from the right. But if you don't have an alternative, You know, it's like the old Ted Turner
People
quote.
definitely want it.
Lead, follow, or get out of the way. Well, yeah, I'm with Ted on this one. If you don't have an alternative that's going to ensure Americans and the truly disadvantaged, get out of the way.
You don't have a solution? Get the hell out of the way. Because you know what? Americans are dying. And the fact that we are going to lose the lower income people and many people in the middle class and many people in general are going to lose their health care this weekend. America should be ashamed that a rich country will treat its underclass, a class that the Federal Reserve chair says in order for us all to have low inflation, in order for us to have low interest rates, we need to keep an underclass. So we need to fire 2 more million Americans if we are to get our economy right. Think about an economic system predicated on horrendous health care. Think about an economic system predicated on having to have a less than optimal unemployment rate. That is shame. All right, folks, we're coming close to the end of the show, and Michael Rudnin wants me to read a long one for you guys, so I'm going to read it very fast because this is an important one. All right, it goes like this. House Republicans want to repeal Biden Inflation Reduction Act. Voters do not. A new Navigator poll released on Thursday indicates that the vast majority of American voters support the Inflation Reduction Act. The legislation passed by Democratic majorities in Congress and signed by President Joe Biden in August 2022 contains historic investments in healthcare, climate change, and deficit reduction measures. Despite the law's popularity, 23 House Republicans are pushing to repeal it as co-sponsors of the Inflation Reduction Act of 2023. The Navigator survey conducted in late February asked 1,000 registered voters whether they supported the law, which it said will give Medicare the power to negotiate lower drug prices, bring down health insurance premiums, and invest in clean energy like wind, solar power. 60% of all respondents said they did. 23% said they did not, and 9% said they were not sure. Among Republicans, 43% backed the law, 46% opposed it. The legislation includes $369 billion for new energy and climate change infrastructure funding, $64 billion to fund a 3-year extension of health insurance subsidies through the Affordable Care Act, and $71 billion to help the Internal Revenue Service modernize operations and crack down on wealthy tax cheats over a period of 10 years. The Congressional Budget Office predicted that the Inflation Reduction Act would decrease the federal budget deficit by $238 billion over a decade. Are you happy now, my dear friend Rudnin? But it was an important read, I must confess. It was an important read. Okay, Carl Cox says Senator Dick Durbin is right when he says the Republican healthcare plan is you get sick, you die. Actually, that came from Congressman, why can't I never remember that congressman's name? Come on, you get sick, you die. Come on, Alan Grayson. Thank you, Alan Grayson. That is from Alan Grayson, not Dick Durbin. All right, let's see what else we got here. Commonwealth Fund, U.S. healthcare from a global perspective, accelerating spending, worsening outcomes. That's because our healthcare system is not about getting people healthy. Our healthcare system is about making money for those who can. Let's remember that. Making money for those who can. Folks, I want to thank you so kindly for coming out here and listening to me every day. Please note that you can support the program by going to politicsdoneright.com/support. politicsdoneright.com/support. Please choose the best option, but we do need your support to stay alive, to stay doing what we're doing. We could not do this without you. I repeat, we could not do this without you. Thank you so kindly. I want you to have a great rest of your day. We have a lot of work to do to change this country. It's not in the order of 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. This is going to be an ongoing up and down process. where there are those who will continue to allow themselves to be indoctrinated to be wards of the plutocracy. But you know what? We have you. You know what? You all make a posse that will make a difference. My name is Egberto Willis. This is Politics Done Right. And you guys know how I end this baby. I am what? What am I? Out! We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number 1, subscribe to our channel. And number 2, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please.